Terry began airstrikes against ISIS in Syria. This morning, the president outlined his strategy before he headed to New York for UN meetings.
Last night, on my orders, America's armed forces began strikes against ISIL targets in Syria. The overall effort will take time. There will be challenges ahead, but we're going to do what's necessary to take the fight to this terrorist group for the security of the country and the region and for the entire world.
He also noted a coalition of 5 Arab nations assisted in the strikes.
We are joined in this action by our friends and partners: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Bahrain, and Qatar. America is proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with these nations on behalf of our common security. The strength of this coalition makes it clear to the world that this is not America's fight alone.
One country that didn't take part was Turkey, our only NATO ally in the region. And what about Europe? Well, on Fox and Friends this morning, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair stressed the importance of forming a coalition to back the U.S.
It's very important we support America at this time. It's absolutely the right thing to take the action against ISIS. I think there is a very strong feeling in Europe too. The single biggest problem we have in security terms in the UK now are returning British fighters from Syria, jihadist fighters. I think and believe Britain will be there with the US. I mean, look, this is a big problem for us, so we've got to help shoulder the responsibility.
Well, with us now to analyze Obama's comments today and preview his UN speech tomorrow is Chief White House Correspondent Ed Henry, here with us at the table in New York. Ed, great to be here with you.
That's awesome.
Okay, so timing of this, very fascinating. You were on Fox and Friends this morning, and you said that the president maybe waited till Congress was out of town.
Well, yeah, I don't think it was a dominant factor, but I think it was not an accident that if he had launched the airstrike, say, last Wednesday or Thursday when Congress was still here, and by the way, had not passed the $500 million he wanted in terms of training and arming the rebels, there might have been a bunch more members of Congress who ended up voting for that who would say, wait a second, he's going forward with the airstrikes without our authorization. Now he wants this other thing. Maybe we'll hold it back. And it might have forced them to actually stay and debate this instead of rushing home, lawmakers in both parties, to campaign, which is what a lot of them do. They didn't want to vote on this. They didn't want to deal with this hot potato.
Is it that, or President Obama did send a letter to both houses, both chambers, Senate and the House, saying he has the right to do it under various legal authorities. But is it that, Ed, or is it playing the timing of the politics of it? So if he waits 6 weeks since we've known ISIS has got Americans, started beheading Americans, if he waits 6 weeks, that's 6 weeks closer to the November election. As you know, as we all know, when we're at war, presidential ratings go up.
Usually does better. I don't think there's any evidence that they did this because of the midterm elections now. I think the biggest reason it appears they did it is because they believe, and we're going to have to press for evidence, but they believe that this Khorasan terror group that nobody really heard of a week or two ago might be ready in planning and in the final stages of terror attacks here in the U.S. That is a big deal, but they're going to have to present the evidence because it sort of runs counter to the narrative they were pushing for a while that, you know, separately, ISIS wasn't that big of a threat. And remember, it was only a few months ago the president was talking about the, post-Al-Qaeda, these affiliates, these offshoots of the JV squad trying to put on the Kobe Bryant uniform. Well, it turns out we're now going to war to fight the JV squad, so they're not quite the JV squad.
Well, let's give credit where credit is due here. For the first time, you've got Arabs bombing Arabs.
Yeah.
And my feeling about NATO is that they wanted to be sure they had Arab countries in the air before you had NATO, so it wasn't all Europeans versus Arabs again.
And they could join at a later stage.
And they will be joining at a later stage, and I predict that Turkey will join them as well. But NATO is not going to sit back and not be involved in this, do you think?
For now, they haven't done anything. I mean, I was in Wales for the NATO summit. NATO?
No, you say they're not doing it. They're working
NATO.
with them right now, working out a... No, I'm talking about
you said
European allies. I'm sorry.
Okay. So let's separate. NATO as a body decided to stay out.
Right.
Now, individual NATO nations like the United Kingdom, for example, yes, we should acknowledge they're not totally sitting on the sidelines. David Cameron's made strong comments, but in terms of action, he's provided intelligence, other support to the coalition, but no airstrikes. I mean, the British have a lot of warplanes. I think he was burned by the fact that he lost that vote in Parliament a year or so ago on bombing Assad, not ISIS, but bombing in Syria, and Cameron might be a little worried about...
There'll be British planes in the air by next week, I predict.
All right, well, we'll see if you're right.
Ed, some are deeply offended by the name Tomahawk being used for a weapon of death. Has the president met with activists to discuss this outrage?
Well,
not to mention the effect these missiles have on the climate which are devastating. Has that come up in any of these discussions at all? And I want you to be perfectly frank.
In fairness to tomahawks.
Yes.
I know you hate the phrase in fairness. I'm going to try to get as many phrases you hate in as possible.
Yes. Back to the matter.
But I think you mentioned climate change. It is kind of interesting because the president today, the big focus was supposed to be his speech about climate change. He still went forward with it. I doubt it'll get that much coverage. You've got China and India not participating in the climate change talks here, so it's sort of pointless without them. But it's interesting because Secretary Kerry many times has talked about climate change as being a huge national security threat. Maybe it is long term, but I think this has woken the White House up to the fact that in the short term, this terror threat is a lot bigger than climate change.
Yeah, that was just a joke question.
No, I was trying to make chicken salad out of whatever the question was.
My real question is...
Anyway.
Well, he just insulted your question.
I know, and it hurts me deeply.
I know it wasn't a real question.
I
was trying to actually run with something. But please,
all right, no, okay, this attack was anticipated well in advance, and I'm wondering, that ISIS was able to evacuate. They were able to spread out and hide their assets. In effect, when you go hunting, you don't, set off a blowhorn before you go hunting. Has that had, a negative effect? Could we have been more efficient if perhaps President Obama had bombed as he was announcing his strategy?
He could have. Look, he did give ISIS at least 2 weeks. Maybe longer, but because 2 weeks ago he spoke to the nation, spoke to the world, and said, I'm authorizing airstrikes in Syria. We're going to be going in at a time of our choosing. But once you say that to the world, ISIS obviously knows it's coming,
right?
And it gives them time. Brett Baer was reporting earlier that we did take out a command and control center. We're taking out infrastructure, but unfortunately ISIS could build new infrastructure, build a new command and control center. The key is going to be taking out some of their key leaders.
And you said 2 weeks ago, the president said that, it was about 4 weeks ago, he said, we don't have a strategy yet.
Right.
2 weeks ago, he warned them that this was coming. 2 years ago, this same action could have taken place under the same legal authorities as now that they are describing. But 200,000 Syrian civilians have been killed. Do they feel any responsibility for allowing a safe haven to grow so that to the point that they get pushed, that the Sunni nations basically push the United States into finally doing something because we have credible evidence of an imminent threat on the homeland? Just last week, you asked Joshua Earnest about the question about credible evidence. They said we have no credible evidence about a terrorist threat from ISIL. So maybe they were parsing words. They don't want to give the Khorazans a heads up. But do they feel any sort of responsibility for saying just 3 months ago they wanted to repeal the authorization to use military force? Now they are actually using the authorization to use military force to take action without talking to the Congress.
He's kind of a lone voice crying out, but it's a Democrat. It's Tim Kaine of Virginia who gave another speech today saying that the president wanted to repeal this authorization from the Bush era and is now using it to his advantage to say, well, we can go to war against, it's an authorization of military force against al-Qaeda, even though the administration has said this is not al-Qaeda. It's an al-Qaeda offshoot. It's an al-Qaeda affiliate. And a Khorasan group didn't exist after 9/11.
They are directly affiliated with al-Qaeda. They are getting their orders from al-Qaeda.
Yeah, but you said that the Sunnis were pushing the United States. It was actually the reverse.
I disagree, Bob. I would tell you that for the last 16 months, the Sunni nations have been begging the United States to do exactly this.
The question is whether they were going to join the fight and get in the air.
So the president basically does the same thing he could have done 2 years ago, but meanwhile, 200,000 Syrian civilians were killed. 130 Kurds are pushed from Syria into Turkey.
I hear that.
You have more of a problem now because you have an imminent threat because ISIL, meanwhile, they're like the worst fighting force we've ever seen, and then you have the Khorasans basically planning American airliner attacks. This all happens while al-Qaeda is on the run.
Do you not realize the significance of Arabs bombing Arabs?
I'm all for it. Look, and I was for the 38 coalition members that joined President Bush and Tony Blair and all that were insulted by Secretary of State John Kerry in the 2004 election. I actually think that these Sunni nations were helping behind the scenes. We didn't make them come out, but they are now forced to. Maybe that's a good thing, and maybe Obama will be applauded as like the best thing that ever happened to the world, but I seriously doubt it. When you have all of this evidence that they were basically doing domestic politics while the Khorasans, however you say their name, were building their capacities as a safe haven in Syria.
I think this will go down as the most historical move to put airplanes in the air.
It's a historical move, but it's not a huge move.
It's not a big thing. What if it doesn't work? And Bob, what about this? So we're going to attack ISIS, then we're going to attack the Khorasans. What is the overarching philosophy? What is President Obama going to say tomorrow to the United Nations? Like, is this a war on terror, or is it a war
don't know,
kind of like once in a while when we go back. It's not semantics. That's actually a philosophy.
Well, there will be, in my view, there will be no ISIS really willing to be able to fight by the elections.
But Ed, it isn't just launching airstrikes without going to Congress first. He did not ask Congress for this authority to do this. He also passed inversion rules through executive fiat, and he's going to the UN to talk about climate change via executive fiat. 3 things circumventing Congress. Dana mentioned George W. Bush, who had a coalition of 38 members who went to the UN, who went to Congress, and not a peep from anyone in Congress about circumventing on something that is undefined and is a fairly big
spent
deal.
8 years calling it an illegal war. I mean, I'm all for the strikes. I'm go for it. Like, bomb the heck out of them. But just admit that they are using the same philosophy that they have denigrated for the past 8 years.
But it's the same thing, though, in the media. I was watching this morning at the gym. Networks applauding the unity of the parties, how we're all speaking as one voice in America, and they dismiss dissent. I don't remember this kind of thoughtfulness under Bush. Back then, dissent during the Iraq War was patriotic. Now it's just mean.
Right.
Well, and you know who's leading the opposition on the Congress? The Democrats are really, it's not just Keane. A lot of Democrats are opposed to this because they're circumventing Congress.
By the way, Assad today said, okay, I'm all for going after ISIS, but meanwhile, he had a MiG fighter jet flying into Israeli airspace, not getting a lot of attention because of what's going on with U.S. airstrikes. The Israelis actually shot one of the Syrian warplanes down. So there's a lot else going on in the region that it's not getting a lot of attention.
You know what your first question is next time you got Josh Earnest up on the right there?
Eric Bolling told
does his hair.
No, not only that, but how come you, for weeks, the administration said that ISIS there's no credible threat to the homeland, ISIS or whatever, basically saying we have time, there's been no credible threat, putting off these actual airstrikes until now, and then they come out and say, well, not only was it credible, it was imminent, it was about to happen, it was planned.
Are you suggesting that they purposely put him off?
Bob, for 6 weeks they've said there's no credible threat to the homeland. We have time. We'll take care of that.
Well, maybe they were trying to get more intel.
Wait a minute. Are you trying to tell me that Josh Earnest and other administration officials haven't said there is, quote, no credible threat to the homeland? We've been reporting on that comment.
ISIS does not have posed a credible threat to the homeland. A lot of us believe that. But
this other, the last 2 or 3 weeks, they just said they bombed Khorasan because
there's an imminent credit for something, just something, for God's sakes. So you just say that they got the Arabs together to bomb these guys.
ISIS is
what is wrong with you?
Because ISIS is incredible, but Khorasan is credible.
Why don't you once?
Have you ever heard of Khorasan? Have you ever heard of this group?
No, and I have.
No, probably neither has anyone else.
That's the governor of New Jersey. I want to hear you just once say something positive.
I like what he did.
Okay, good. Thank you.
More airstrikes.
Or you ever invite somebody to your dinner table and your family and they're guests and you kind of feel like you've had, I don't know, a comfortable moment with them? Ed, welcome to the 5
I was left out. I didn't get
Ed, you were like the blind.
By the way, can I ask you about Yemen?
All right. Coming up.